Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Smith, and welcome back to Movie Club. Tonight, we are continuing our journey down Halloween and horror classics with the 1984 seminal slasher from writer-director Wes Craven, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, this film is technically preceded by the two other franchise starters for the other two main horror icons from the 80s, and that would be Jason from Friday the 13th and Michael Myers from the Halloween series. Halloween came out in 1978 and was written and directed by John Carpenter, whereas Friday the 13th came out in 1980. And as much as I love those two other films, those two other franchises, I think my heart is with the fantastic writing from at least the first three films from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. But we're only going to talk about the first one tonight from 1984. And there's a lot to talk about because this was written and directed by stalwart of the genre, Wes Craven, who would go on to make Scream in that franchise, as well as work on a bunch of other very, very important horror films throughout his incredible career. Now, sadly, Wes Craven passed away in 2015 and left behind a huge body of work that he could have continued to add on to had he been given a couple more years. What he left behind were these incredible characters, these incredible stories that he'd been working on for decades. And the fact that so many of the characters that he was a huge part in bringing to the screen are still around and are still celebrated and are still used as Halloween costumes every single year should mean something. So let's take a moment and rewind back to the year 1984. Where the horror subgenre slasher was just picking up steam. At this point, we already had undead man-children in the form of Jason killing innocent teenagers who violated certain rules, and had this very Catholic understanding of what was acceptable. There was a very religious undertone, or a puritanical undertone to the rules behind what preceded a horror death. But at least in the other two major horror franchises from the 80s, sleep was a bit of a respite from the horrors of the real world, the horrors of the monsters that they were facing. Here, it's the other way around. Sleep is the unsafe place. Your dreams are not a place of peace, not a place of respite, not a place of safety. They are a place of death. Now, strangely enough, this film is kind of loosely based off of true stories. And I say very, very loosely. But instead of me trying to explain it, here's a clip from one of my personal favorite horror podcasts, the Dead Meat Podcast, which is hosted by Chelsea Rebecca and James A. Janice, talking about how this technically does tie into a true story. Take it away, Chelsea.
Sleep paralysis is common and not dangerous. However, in the late 1970s and early 1980s in the United States, over 100 Hmong immigrants died as a result of distress related to sleep paralysis.
That's so crazy.
So during the Vietnam War, the Hmong fought a guerrilla war against the communist government of Laos. That turned out good. When the government won, many Hmong fled to the U.S. The U.S. decided to spread the incoming Hmong population across 53 different cities instead of keeping them all in one place. So what this did is, because their population became so dispersed, is it immediately put them at risk for experiencing this kind of sleep paralysis, because often, it can be something caused by stress. Mm-hmm. But in their culture, they perform religious rituals to protect themselves against the kind of demon that would come in your sleep to steal your breath. So their spirits, and in their minds, the spirits of their homeland, aren't able to protect them anymore. Okay. So once you're visited by this evil entity at night, you need the help of a shaman, who is now inaccessible because you're all split up. And they're very superstitious.
Yeah.
What I've read is that they were very, very, very superstitious against this kind of entity.
And then they would just die?
So beginning in 1977, otherwise completely healthy refugees just started dying in their sleep. As word got around in the Hmong community in the United States that this was happening, many began to take preventative measures. Lots of the prevailing theory for why so many Hmong were dying in their sleep is taken from the work of Shelley Adler. So her idea is this combination of such stress from being displaced on top of the stress of being separated from each other on top of the stress of, oh my God, I can't perform this ritual to protect myself against this evil demon was just straight up killing people.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. And that is why I think you should totally check out the rest of that incredible podcast episode and pretty much every other episode they put out, because they are fantastic and incredibly well researched. But back to the film at hand. This film has my favorite final girl of any horror franchise to date. Yes, I love Jamie Lee Curtis in the original Halloween and the 2018 Halloween film from David Gordon Green. I really love those performances from her, and I think she's a fantastic final girl. But this film's Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp, is my personal favorite. Final Girl Nancy is technically only in 3 of the films that make up this franchise, which includes 6 original theatrical films, as well as a crossover and the god-awful reboot. Here's what I had to say on Letterboxd about that.
It's not scary, and it's not fun. The 2 biggest sins a cheesy remake of a great slasher can commit. The greatest sin of all, at least for me, is that it makes me long for the days that Freddy's Dead was the worst in the franchise. To sum up, if I ever binge the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise again, you can rest assured that this is one installment I'll be sleeping on.
Yeah, it's that bad. I hate the remake, but I do adore the original, with stellar practical effects from the 80s, incredible dreamlike imagery, and brilliant acting and dialogue all the way around. It truly proves that Wes Craven was an incredible force to be reckoned with, both at this point in his career and later in 1996 when he directed Scream. But this film didn't just introduce my favorite final girl. It also has technically the first theatrical film role from actor Johnny Depp.
I'm gonna punch out your ugly lights, whoever you are.
Now, at this point, he's not doing weird accents or doing anything eccentric or wearing way too many scarves or belts or whatever. This is not the Johnny Depp we know now. This is young Johnny Depp. But he's fun to watch in this film. I enjoy it. But I would be remiss to not mention the fantastic work from classically trained actor Robert Englund, who brings to life this franchise's villain in a way that no other franchise can really do. Whereas the 2 other big franchises from the 1980s are just masked intruders who are played by a variety of different actors, Freddy here in this film is played by a singular actor all the way through until the remake. One of my other favorite actors from this film is the late, great John Saxon.
What did that, Lieutenant? I don't know.
Tina!
What's the coroner got to say? He's in the jaw and puking since he saw it.
Who was not only in a ton of incredible horror films, but was just an all-around nice guy, which you can find out from pretty much anybody who ever worked with him. Saxon passed away earlier this year and has left behind an incredible body of work that's totally worth checking out. I mean, we're also going to be checking out one of his other works later this year in December, so stick around for that. So here's the quick rundown for the plot for people who are unaware of it. Freddy Krueger used to be this mild-mannered, humble janitor who just worked around this local school system. When parents got wind of the fact that he might be hurting their children, they decided to team up together and commit an act of vigilante justice, burning the man to death. And they thought that would have solved the problem. But something strange happened. Freddy Krueger died physically, but he's come back to haunt the children of the parents who tried to kill him. There's quite a few cameos here as well from people who would either go on to become incredible famous actors or people who were already up and coming at the time. Charles Fleischer is one of my favorite little Easter eggs in this film, who just plays a little doctor in a couple scenes. Charles Fleischer might not be a name that immediately pops into your head, but if you hear this voice,
Hey, me, Eddie!
you probably recognize him. That is Charles Fleischer, right here playing Roger Rabbit from the incredible film Who Framed Roger Rabbit, directed by Robert Zemeckis. Of course, Lin Shaye also makes a delightful appearance here as a teacher. Lin Shaye is probably not a name that automatically is conjured into your brain, but you've seen her in a variety of incredible films, especially if you have seen the Insidious movies. She's also been in a variety of other horror films, so if you look around modern horror movies, you're typically going to find her in a couple of them. All in all, every little element that goes into A Nightmare on Elm Street is absolutely fantastic. It stands the test of time and is incredibly fun and creepy in all the right ways. With dialogue that will oscillate between making you laugh, because it's supposed to, and some of the cheesier dialogue bits, it's a gem. It walks the line between cheesy and excellence, and I think it's the perfect encapsulation of the 80s at its best, especially 80s horror. You can't leave behind talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street without talking about the fantastic score from Charles Bernstein. Charles Bernstein is probably most well known for his score for this movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street, but he's also done a variety of other films, including just the year prior, the score for the Stephen King-inspired Cujo. Prior to that, in the 70s, he was the composer for a lot of different action films, as well as westerns of the time. This included the score for the Burt Reynolds starring White Lightning. So without further ado, Movie Club is delighted to present tonight's Halloween feature of Wes Craven's 1984 horror film, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Happy Halloween.
I'm your boy from the down dancing.